Cool. Hey everyone, what's going on? I'm Abhay, and over the past few months, I've been working on a few things, but they're all sort of tied to and centralized towards blockchain, pun intended. Mainly, I've been focusing in Web3, and so I built some cool applications. Got to work at some really legit organizations, meet legit people, and most impactful of all, I've been able to sell JPEGs online for money. It's not impactful, and I haven't made any money. I've actually lost. But regardless of that. Over the last few weeks, I started to realize that a lot of the work I was doing wasn't necessarily making impact. And when I first decided that I wanted to go deep into blockchain, I wanted to do it with the intent of using it to make some type of social change or social good. And so that's why I started to reconsider some of the projects I was building. And I wanted to make sure that my next project is actually something that at least shows that blockchain has the potential to make an impact. So the first step here was for me to look into actual problems. So one of my favorite non-biased news source, Instagram, and I was just procrastinating, but I ended up on here, and I just, while scrolling, saw like a Trump fan page where this man was outraged over the mail-in ballots and called the voting system a fraud, pretty much, which I kind of found funny because the election was like 2 years ago, and anything he says doesn't really matter. But as someone who's not really into politics, I wanted to look into like whether or not his claims were true. Were you saying, the mail-in ballots are counted incorrectly? There isn't exactly proper supervision over the people counting the ballots. And so I looked into it, and pretty much it's just misinformation. It's not actually a problem in the United States, just because the government has so much power and is able to identify everyone so easily. On top of that, the people counting the voting ballots are always supervised. So it's very, very difficult to commit voter fraud. You're more likely to get struck by lightning than be part of an election where there's voter fraud. So it's more of a misinformation problem. But then I started to think, what about countries that don't have the organizational power of a democracy like the United States? And that's when I came to realize that, especially in places in Africa, there's a lot of voter fraud just because of the corruption amongst the government there. And so I wanted to look at this and see how can I use blockchain to solve this problem. And so first I wanted to look at what the voting process actually looks like and where the fraud is occurring. So very, very simply, the voting process literally just has 3 components where people will go in, submit their vote. Then in the next step, there will be either a person or a machine that counts up all the ballots, and then whatever number they get is added to the total tally. So whenever something goes wrong here, it's always with this middleman, because in places like Africa, they don't have surveillance cameras or supervisors that are able to make sure that whatever's going on while these people are counting ballots is legal and people aren't changing voting ballots and things like that. So I decided that the best way to do this would just be to completely cut out the middleman. And that's when I made this application. It's super simple. I call it SecureVote, and all it does is it cuts out the middleman, where you, the voter, just submit your vote and it's directly added to the tally. So the app itself is pretty intuitive. You just click one of these buttons to vote for who you want after connecting a MetaMask wallet. For those of you unfamiliar, MetaMask wallet is just what you sort of use on the Ethereum blockchain to verify who you are. So you'll get like a wallet address, which is basically just your name on the blockchain. And so when you click one of these buttons, what happens is a smart contract is called on the back end. And this smart contract is basically just waiting for certain conditions to be met. So in this case, it's going to wait for you to authenticate who you're voting for, so whether it be John Tory or the other guy is kind of irrelevant because everyone knows John Tory's going to win. And then depending on when those conditions are met, it's going to give you an output, which will, in this case, be updating the vote count. So very simply, a smart contract is literally just a piece of program that waits for conditions to be met. Once those conditions are met, it gives you the output you need. So you can kind of think of it like a vending machine. When, let's say you want to buy like a bag of Doritos. So you would click, C5 on the vending machine. Then it would prompt you to pay $2, or I mean, like with inflation, probably like $4 now, if we're being real. But it would prompt you to pay the amount. And so once those 2 conditions have been met, which is selecting your item and paying the amount, it will give you the output, which in this case is the bag of Doritos, or in the case of our application, it's updating the vote count. Now, if you're someone with a technical background, but not necessarily familiar with blockchain, this doesn't necessarily sound secure, because obviously there's somebody who's writing the contract and the data is being stored somewhere, and therefore whoever wrote the contract can just access the data, manipulate it, or change how the contract works, and pretty much fundamentally destroy that. But that's really where the power of the blockchain comes in. all of the contract itself is a block on this blockchain. And every single block on the blockchain has 3 main components. So it'll have the data, something called a hash, and the previous hash. And so the data in this case would just be the smart contract data. So making sure the conditions are met and then giving an output when those conditions are met would be the data. And then using the data and a SHA-256 function, you can pretty much determine a hash. So that's just a mathematical sort of output that's done by computers. And the hash is just like a 18 string character long code that's almost like the ID of the block on the chain. And then the way they're all chained together is each block also has the hash of the block before it. So what this means is that if someone tries to manipulate, let's say, block number 28 here, and the data is there, Tori, the hash is BAC, and the previous hash is CBA. So if you went and manipulated this block and changed the data, so if you went and manipulated this block and changed the data, it would in turn change the hash to now ABC. What that means is the next block, the previous hashes don't line up, and that would mean that all of these next blocks become completely invalid, and it would become pretty prominent that someone is trying to manipulate the blockchain. On top of that, manipulating if you did want to pull this off, you have to change each and every one of these blocks. And with the SHA-256 function, it takes approximately 10 minutes for even the fastest computers to get this done. So if there's 28 more blocks ahead of this, you would have to pretty much spend 280 minutes rewriting all this data, and you have to do that all before the next block is launched, which again, the next block would only take about 10 minutes to launch. So it's pretty much impossible to actually manipulate the data here. Now, this project in and of itself, will it solve the voting crisis in Northwestern Africa? Probably not. But the intention really here is just to show that blockchain can be a part of the solution. People, obviously, with the corruption there, can still threaten, blackmail, get private keys and wallet addresses to manipulate the votes in their favor. But the intention, again, really here is just to show that smart contracts can be applied to different problems in the world. So if we think of other examples, like something as simple as banking or insurance, a bank could have a smart contract set up that just reads your credit history and your credit score, and then based on those 2 conditions, if certain quotas are met, it'll give you the output, which would be your loan, or same thing for insurance claims. And altogether, we could use this technology to apply it onto different fields and hopefully make a difference in the world.